Just get our power. Oop. All right, let me start. Oh my goodness. Let me start our slideshow. There we go. Can people see it? Thumbs up. Okay. Fantastic. Cheryl, you there?
I'm here.
Excellent. All right, we'll be alternating talking about our program. As with many of the programs at MVLS, we are kind of our own little self-contained project. We have a few objectives we wanted to try to meet today with our presentation, just kind of explain exactly how we work, because we have a unique partnership with a nonprofit called the Human Trafficking Prevention Project that actually started out as a clinical program at University of Baltimore, but has recently transitioned to a nonprofit. Just defining HT, talking about client services, how they differ from our the intake team's process. Though of course we know every program has their own unique model they use. Give you an overview of what we do in terms of training, teaching, systemic advocacy, and then answer any questions. So. All right, so to jump in, as you saw from the notes earlier today, I've been here 6 years. The Human Trafficking Prevention Project does predate me. And Cheryl's been here the last 2 years, which was a very welcome expansion to the work that we're doing in this particular field. We've been partnering with the Human Trafficking Prevention Project in some form since 2016. And again, as I stated, it was originally a clinical program at the University of Baltimore, headed by Jessica Emerson, who founded the project, where she was assisting folks who had experiences that met the legal definition of human trafficking with vacatur and expungement, primarily criminal record relief. And she had more people to assist than could be handled by the slow pace of the clinic. And that led to the partnership with MVLS. Initially, it was just getting our volunteers to help with criminal record relief, and then expanded to help with all kinds of legal issues. We do serve a really wide range of clients. Our primary focus is on folks who may have experienced sex and/or labor trafficking, or who traded sex for any reason, including by choice, out of just their personal circumstances, or if there was coercion, force, or fraud, which we'll talk about in a minute, kind of is the core of what the definition of human trafficking entails. For people that meet those parameters, we try to provide a very deep dive, comprehensive civil legal services, assisting with criminal record relief, consumer debt matters, particularly lately credit repair under our new federal law, Debt Bondage Prevention Act, assisting with family law matters, lots of divorce, lots of custody cases, lots of contempt cases, and lots of kind of very unusual, challenging cases that I have to give a huge shout out to Nancy. It's been great since she came on to help troubleshoot a lot of those. We do a lot of name and gender marker changes too for our clients, and we also see a fair amount of people with tax concerns, and we've referred them to John and to Janice prior to John. As a prevention project, though, we don't just help folks who have experiences that meet the legal definition of HT or trade sex. We also try to look at what makes people vulnerable to future exploitation and assist at least with criminal record relief for those folks. And so we work with a lot of organizations and team up with partners that are serving people that have any of the listed issues here on the slide. They've experienced interpersonal violence, sexual assault, housing instability. They're either actively or have used substances. They've had past involvement in the criminal legal system. They have unstable immigration status, or they've experienced discrimination in various ways. Usually the folks that we're working with have, like, I'd say at least 3 of those things intersecting that put them at an increased vulnerability for future exploitation. And we'll dive a little bit more into this in a second. I did want to just make sure everyone's on the same page about what human trafficking is. The term gets a lot of play in the news. I feel like sometimes different groups will grab onto it as a human rights issue to raise, or something to, I don't know, be shocked about. And there's lots of kind of sensationalized stories. Depictions in the media are often not really what we see in the clients that we serve. So I want to share the definition that we base our work on. Human trafficking is something that's defined internationally, federally, at the state level, also at the local level at times. But in the US, um, most definitions are based on this federal law that comes from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which was passed in 2000. Kind of crazy. Just take a step back for a moment and realize there wasn't a federal definition of human trafficking that was widely accepted, or a definition that was widely accepted until 2000. But the TVPA really kind of created a standard. And you can see there's a definition of severe forms of trafficking in persons. That's the language used in the law. And it's divided into two things: sex trafficking, where there's use of force, fraud, or coercion to recruit, harbor, transport, provide, obtain, patronize, solicit a person for a commercial sex act, or if the person is performing a commercial sex act and they're under the age of 18, there does not need to be force, fraud, or coercion. Labor trafficking is defined, again, you see this force, fraud, or coercion, to basically keep a person in a situation where they cannot leave a place of employment, or a situation where they're providing labor. The difference is, so with labor trafficking, the reason there isn't this caveat about people performing this act under the age of 18 is because folks under the age of 18 can work. And so, it's not, a differentiation is done with folks who are engaging in commercial sex, because the way this law is looking at it is that folks under the age of 18 should not be able to engage in a commercial sex act. So if they're doing that, they're automatically considered to be a victim of human trafficking under the law, even if there wasn't force, fraud, or coercion. It's a little confusing, but one thing that's good is, say somebody is 16, they are housing unstable, they're trading sex for any reason, whether there was some kind of force, fraud, or coercion or not. Maybe they're just doing it to survive, because they don't have a place to stay, they need to earn some money. Because they're considered a victim of trafficking under the federal law, they're able to access a lot of benefits and protections that they might not otherwise be able to access. I'm happy to answer any questions about this. Megan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, it might be helpful to explain to us what constitutes a commercial sex act.
A commercial sex act is where there is someone who is basically being given a benefit in exchange for a sexual act. And doesn't need to necessarily be intercourse. And that benefit doesn't need to necessarily be money. It could be getting drugs. It could be getting a safe place to stay. It could be, there's a long list of things. Anything that's kind of like essential to the person's like welfare or safety. So there's a pretty expansive interpretation of that, when we're looking at what constitutes a commercial sex act. And there's, that's something that is still debated, right? Like, especially with, like, say, sex acts happening via the internet. Like, we could go into a long discussion about this, right? Like, how this plays out. It's something that is litigated, constantly kind of evolving. So, but that's the basic definition. And I'm happy to chat further about this with anyone that has questions. The big crux of both the definitions of labor and sex trafficking, though, is the terms force, fraud, and coercion. You need force, fraud, or coercion for there to be trafficking. For example, sometimes you will hear of someone, again, trading sex for any reason, and say that person trading sex, they're over 18, they're making the choice to trade sex. That's not human trafficking if they're just choosing to do so, unless there's some element of forced fraud or coercion. Prostitution is not human trafficking under the federal and our state definition. Another example I like to give is, say someone is taken across an international border, right? They're taken from one country to another. And I feel like this is where we hear a lot of, often they use human trafficking used in the news. People are being trafficked into our country. And just the act of taking somebody across an international border is not trafficking per se, it's human smuggling. If someone is paid to take someone across the border, or someone pays to take somebody across the border, that's human smuggling. If somebody pay someone to take them across the border, and then they are trapped in a situation where they're told they have to trade sex and are unable to, leave the situation or get away from the person who took them across the border, then it morphs into a trafficking situation. Again, I could go down many, many rabbit holes with this, but there are certain things that have to be met to be able to meet that definition of human trafficking. And there's lots of confusion around the term. And I only expect in the next years for the confusion to increase because of the ways that certain parties in the national discourse use this term. Force is easy to understand. As you can see from the bullets that are up here, it's pretty straightforward. Fraud's a little bit more complicated. We often see people that are kind of doing a bait and switch around situations that are promised to somebody and then what the actuality is. I've worked with a lot of folks who came over here on certain visas, especially in diplomatic circles, who were told they were going to be working for a family and then ended up in a situation where they had their passport taken away. They were, having hours and terms of their employment that completely did not meet what they were expecting, and that turned into a situation of labor trafficking. If there was sexual assault or exploitation involved, it could be labor and sex trafficking. Coercion is the most tricky, but it's the thing that we see the most often, where there's lots of psychological, emotional abuse, threats to harm somebody, threats to their family, other loved ones. And I think what we see most frequently in the clients that we work with is this exploitation of a need. Here in Baltimore City and in many places in Maryland, it's exploitation when somebody is using drugs, when they are in a very precarious housing situation, or they have a history of past abuse. Anyone can be a victim. Our list here is kind of funny that we have like women at the top, people who identify as women. There are men and boys, people who are non-binary. Anyone can be exploited. Anyone can be trafficked. This is just what we see the most predominantly in the clients that we serve and what service providers see nationally here in the United States. I will say again, in Baltimore City and in with the groups that we work with through the HTPP partnership, we work with a lot of folks who are transgender women. We work with a lot of folks who are grappling with substance use, again, currently or perhaps in the past, and folks who are in situations of family or domestic violence and struggling with housing stability. All right. We don't usually work with youth. We're mainly working with adults. There are lots of programs in Maryland that do work with youth, though, and we're happy to connect people with them if they have more questions about that. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Cheryl.
Thanks, Heather. I want to just note that the next couple of slides actually kind of relate to our attempt to answer a few questions that colleagues in the intake team had. And, it seems like a survey is a topic of every staff meeting. Well, this was another, except this was an informal survey of me just walking around with a notepad. So one question we had was, how do we get our clients? And like a number of other MVLS projects, our potential clients come through legal clinics, online referrals, direct contact. Someone will call Heather, a former client may refer someone to us because they found our services particularly helpful. And then also we get potential clients from the intake team. If a team member is in the process of doing an intake and they see a prostitution charge or maybe a history of domestic violence, they'll give us a ping to see if this client fits sort of within our criteria. Then those potential clients are assessed during a weekly case conference meeting with the HTPP nonprofit. So cases are presented and then they're assigned. And one organization might take the case, period. Or frequently we have a situation where either MVLS, HTPP, or HTPP will take the lead, and then we'll just work on different legal matters together. So for example, a client might come through a legal clinic. They're interested in criminal record relief and a divorce, but their priority really is criminal record relief. And so the HTPP might take that case, go through the process of filing the expungement petitions over the course of several months. And then when that client is ready to focus on the divorce, then the HTPP staff will let us know through the case conference, and then we'll do an intake and begin to work with the client on that second legal matter. If, however, the client indicates through the legal clinic or other process that they only want a divorce, then when it's presented in the case conference, MVLS will just take that case. And then, as Heather mentioned, for quite a long period of time, MVLS did a lot of criminal record relief with victims and survivors of human trafficking. Over the period of time that I've been here, and probably a little bit preceding, we're doing everything, a lot of family law, a lot of the consumer DBRA, and some criminal record relief, as well as the name and gender marker changes. Heather, can we go to the next slide?
Yep. And I'll just say that that change occurred too because our partners at the HTPP, as they moved to a nonprofit, they began to get their own staff as opposed to just having a clinical director with students slowly working on cases. So that we've been having these morphs and shifts in our history. That's been interesting how it affects our caseload.
Thanks. So another question that folks had was about our intake process and how does it differ, or how does it align with the traditional, the standard MVLS process? And we thought it was really important to take a minute to sort of describe how our overall process or approach differs. And that really entails a commitment to work that's guided by trauma-informed approaches. And but in order to discuss the approaches, first we need to have a common definition of trauma. So if you go online right now and you pull up the Oxford Dictionary, look up trauma, you'll find a number of different definitions. One will discuss trauma as an injury. Another, trauma as a frightening or upsetting experience. On the slide, if you can read it, there are 3 definitions, and the first 2 come from a clinical law review article, The Pedagogy of Trauma-Informed Lawyering by Sarah Katz and Dea Halder. And that definition is: an event is traumatic when it renders an individual's internal and external resources inadequate, making effective coping impossible. And that definition really frames our approach and describes what we regularly see in our clients. Next slide. So what we see in terms of our clients really is captured best by statements that are found in this book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's by psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk. It's on the New York Times bestsellers list. It's very accessible, very readable. And basically what he indicates is that exposure to abuse, violence, and exploitation fosters the development of a hyperactive alarm system that molds a body that gets stuck in the stress response of fight, flight, and freeze. So understanding trauma, critical to understanding trauma, is that it reshapes the brain and the body. It impacts the ability to remember, to concentrate, to trust, and to regulate emotions. Now, we're not psychologists or psychiatrists or social workers. I'm a legal advocate with a little bit of paralegal training, and Heather is an attorney. We don't have the skill or ability to treat, and that's not our job. But we really are required to adjust the client relationship based upon an awareness of client trauma. Empathy and sympathy are not enough. And being pleasant and nice, this is all coming from me, right? Because I try to be nice to everyone, but being pleasant and nice, it is absolutely not enough. We are all really challenged to understand the need to adjust the relationship with the client to ensure that we can work with them to address their legal need. So next slide, we talk about how is it that we do adjust. So first and foremost is client agency. To the extent possible, we really want to be responsive to the client. We want to make sure that they're taking the lead. So when I call and try to set up an intake meeting, I don't call and say, hey, I've got an hour on Thursday at 2:00. Can you do that? No. The questions really are about what's your availability? You know, when can you fit this in? I've got broad availability, you know, within, you know, a week framework or whatever, but what's most convenient for you? A second really important adjustment that we make is every attempt to reduce barriers. We all know that one of the most significant barriers in the application process relates to document collection. And so what we do is everything that we can in order to collect documents on people's behalf. So for example, if I'm working remotely, sometimes I'll just run over to the Howard County Court Library and print out documents, petitions, court orders, etc., that we don't have any other way of getting. In the 2 years that I've been with this project, I can think of only one case where a client had a copy of a court document. And when we think about our clientele, it's completely understandable. These are people who have unstable housing. Frequently, they're in shelters or residential treatment facilities. Their documents are lost. They can't remember. We've had clients who want a divorce, but they can't remember what county they were in nor what year the marriage took place. And our response has been, no worries, we'll try to figure this out. This is what I can do, and let's see how we can work together to sort this out. When I am able to secure a document, I'll send it to them. I'll send them a copy so that they then have it for their records. We work really hard to try to find criminal cases to expunge where those records are not on MDEC or on Maryland Judicial Case Search. We write the court, we call the court can't find it. The case may come up on a client's background documents, but we don't have a case number, no one can find the record. So we call the archive. We do whatever we can do in order to ensure that we get the documents that the clients need in order for them to have their cases resolved. We also are committed to regular client communication. And, you know, we've tried several approaches. I've tried several approaches. It's very challenging, right? But right now we have a system in place, and, you know, we'll see if it works. But we have a system in place where after the intake, I am in contact with a client every week during the first and second month. So that means over the course of 2 months, they should be getting 8 calls, 8 texts, 8 emails, and sometimes where it's appropriate, you know, letters are thrown in there too. And this very sort of liberal approach to the intake process, right, which is noted on the slide, can take like 20 minutes if everything is together, or it can take like 2 months because people sometimes are busy, people aren't ready to talk, something has come up, someone has relapsed and they're not available for a couple of months. But we do what we can to make it, again, as accessible as is possible. But by the third month, we really do have to begin to set some firmer parameters. And so we'll send a 10-day notice by the third month. I'm sorry, we haven't been able to connect. And, if we can't connect in the next 10 days, then we'll have to close this case. If we still aren't able to connect, then we have to close the case. But we don't send a letter that says you haven't been available, you haven't responded to our outreach efforts, and so your case is closed. No, we're like, look, we understand this case might not be your priority right now. If you do want to work with us on this case, we'd be delighted to reopen your case. And so this regular contact is something we've just started, and we will see if it is sustainable because, real life has a way of undermining some of the best laid plans. Megan, you've got a question.
Yeah, Cheryl, would you mind sending out an email, like example of one of those closure letters? Because I think that's really great and something that I'd like to look at to potentially incorporate into our cases as well.
Sure, will do.
Thank you.
Heather and I will get together and we'll send something out. The other point that we wanted to make before we move on to the next slide is that clients may come to us with one legal matter, but during the intake, many legal matters may emerge. And I just want to refer back to that first case that I mentioned about expungement. A client has an interest in assistance, needing assistance with expungement, and the HTPP takes the lead. And then, but they also are interested in a divorce. And so when they're done with the expungement, they come over to us and I do an intake and they want a divorce. But then they also want a completely fresh start. So they want a name change, not a conversion back to their maiden name. They want a new name that reflects of who they are at that moment. So that means a name change case. Then they may reveal in the intake that while they were trafficked, they were forced to sign a lease, or they went to the emergency room because their trafficker, their intimate partner had assaulted them. So now they've got medical debt and other debt, another case. Then they may say, and I'm really not feeling well and I have these medical issues. And so I really need an advance directive. I want to make sure that I have an advance directive. And that means that, I want my friend so-and-so to have power of attorney. Okay, so now there's, out of one case, a divorce, there are now, 5 legal matters. And 5 may be uncommon, but having 2 or 3 is become more the norm than an exception. So then on the next slide, is this you or me, Heather? I think this is you, right? You're on.
I think it's me. Yeah, it's just a little bit of a continuation about our process. I think Cheryl did an excellent summary of just the, we really, to be successful with our clients, we really have to forge relationships with them. And there's a lot of mistrust at the beginning often, especially if we're meeting folks through clinics, which is the main way that we get people. They might not be meeting with us at first, they might be meeting with our colleagues at the HTPP nonprofit. In the beginning, it's often hard, lots of missed calls, lots of returning, lots of kind of not hostility, but just what are you going to do? Like, real challenges, building up trust. And so it can take a while. And that also can make our model of using volunteers a little bit challenging too. We do take a lot of cases in-house. I take a lot of cases myself, depends on the client's needs. We try to place with volunteers where we can, particularly family law. Again, huge shout out to Nancy and to the intake team for just their help with placing some of these really, really challenging family law cases, especially where there's situations where a trafficker might be the opposing party, or somebody doesn't want or wants to share their history of being trafficked as part of family law proceedings, which raises all kinds of complications and extraneous circumstances, and safety planning and all these things that we have to be really concerned about. We do try to leverage volunteers where we can. That's something I'm trying to build back up, is our volunteer pool. There is a separate panel that we have for HTPP volunteers, which, again, we're kind of working on getting a more robust group built up for all of these different matters. We try to check in with clients throughout the course of representation. I check in with attorneys. We both check in with clients, see how things are going. It's very common for additional legal needs or other referral needs to come up during the course of representation. And we also have some kind of challenging tracking requirements we have to meet because we're federally funded. Our grants are a little bit unusual and they come directly from the Department of Justice, or they are other federal money that is flowing through the state government, the governor's office. And unfortunately, that comes with some extreme tracking requirements. We have to track every single time we have a touch with a client. That can be a text, a phone call, not just put it in legal server, but have it broken out in a way that we can count all of these touches, quantify them, categorize them. And so make administering this program fun. All right. We do a lot of outreach. We just wanted to share with you where we are currently doing legal clinics. Right now, we're currently doing legal clinics where MVLS leads them at Marion House and at Spark Center for Women down in Pigtown. And our colleagues at the HTPP are currently going monthly to Drink at the Well and to Helping Up Mission Center for Women and Children. We have a lot of places we used to go when we're constantly recalibrating where we are doing in-person clinics. We were doing in-person clinics out in Western Maryland as well, but staffing shortages at our colleagues at the HTPP have meant we had to put that on hold for a while. But in the next year, we are probably going to be having in-person clinics in the Baltimore City area, Western Maryland, and on the Eastern Shore that'll all be feeding into our partnership program. We do a lot of community outreach as well when we can. I'm stretched a little thin lately, I'll say, but we go out to community resource fairs. Our partners ask us to come. We try to be very responsive. And then we also engage in a fair amount of education and systemic advocacy. We do quarterly webinars on various topics. You can see all of them at our MVLS HTPP HT web pages, which are on a different slide. We do a lot of in-person trainings. That's a great place for us to leverage our engagement with volunteers. And we also are very responsive to community partners, service providers, other organizations that may want us to come in and do a training on these issues, both criminal record relief, human trafficking, trauma-informed lawyering, any of the issues that we work on, we'll come in and train on that. And we've also in the past engaged in a fair amount of systemic advocacy and legislative advocacy. I don't think we'll be doing that much this year just because we have a lot of kind of internal reworkings that are happening with the HTPP's movement from a clinic to a nonprofit. And just calibrating that with our own two-person project here at MVLS. But when we do systemic advocacy, we just really try to think about not just how to respond to trafficking, but what leads to people being vulnerable to exploitation. That's like the thing we keep saying. It's not somebody randomly being kidnapped off the street. It's somebody who's living in poverty, who is using substances, who is but potentially, not always, but potentially, where something can be leveraged to put them in a place of vulnerability. It's, laws and policies and things that create more discrimination in our world, that put people in places of marginalization. That's what creates a vulnerability for trafficking. And we try to look at how we can shore up systems make things more equitable and just make people more safe overall. Megan, I see your hand up again. Thanks for asking.
Hope you don't mind my
We're gonna
peppering
wrap
of
it up.
questions.
Sorry, we can go on and on.
This is actually probably more relevant to the content on the last slide. Because you were talking about how you do, general outreach when you have capacity, but there's a lot of us who are, doing outreach all the time for our programs and MVLS generally. So thinking about like the scope, let's just say this, I don't think I'm doing your program justice when I'm talking to people about the scope of MVLS services. So for those of us who aren't you and Cheryl, and we're just talking to community members or partners about MVLS, how would you recommend that we frame your project? Because the scope is so large, and like you said, you're not only serving people who are victims or survivors of trafficking, but also people who are at risk. So what would be your, elevator pitch that you'd offer to us to use with community members?
Sure. We have distilled that down into some wonderful like brochures and handouts that we have. So I would encourage you to pop by Cheryl or I's spaces, the office, to be able to grab things. But what I would say is human trafficking exists everywhere, particularly in places of high inequality. And we often think about it the wrong way and overlook folks who should be able to access resources, but they aren't, and they aren't able, and they don't know where to get help. And I can come up with a more elegant thing, and Cheryl, I want to give you a chance to answer that as well. But it's a very misunderstood issue. There's a lot of people that are made vulnerable to it. Again, great inequalities just foster this. Discrimination fosters this. And so, yeah, like we just need to think more expansively about who might be affected, not buy into kind of media stereotypes or the popular, I don't know how to phrase it right now, tip of my tongue, but it's not taken. It's somebody who's struggling in a home where there's abuse, who is looking for resources in new places, and then finds himself in a situation of exploitation and doesn't know how to get help.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl, anything to add to that?
Oh, lots, but
yeah, so much.
but
That's why I said
the
elevator
coffee
pitch.
or something.
Yeah. But we have lots of things we can give you. We're happy to break it down. Please, please, please come take things from, again, we have so many flyers we've created. We have so many things. So, Mara, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I have a quick question about your caseload. What is like your typical caseload, and are there times of the year where you get more clients?
So every quarter I have to tally up like how many folks we've touched, worked with specifically in a quarter. And I would say, it's on MVLS's end, it's typically between like 40 and 80 a quarter. Cheryl, I don't know if that sounds right to you.
Mhm.
It depends. So, it's been lower in the past. It depends on, how many clinics we're at, what the weather's like. You know what I mean? Like a lot of different things. But we usually have a lot of cases open. It's always a challenge for us to know when to close cases. Cheryl was talking a little bit about this as she was kind of talking about like the outreach we do to try to even get people through that intake process. Because a lot of our folks will drop off and then come back. Sometimes months, sometimes years later. Or we will see them again later at a clinic. They'll come to a different location, we've had folks that we've talked to at like Helping Up Mission, then show up at Spark, a couple months down the road. The folks we work with are often scared to give us a lot of their personal information initially till we build up trust. So it can be a little hard to quantify.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. So one of the other questions that we received from colleagues was how staff can learn more about project and support the partnership. And Heather started to answer, provided some answers in response to Megan's questions. I think, though, that for me, the first thing that I would want to note is that you guys really rock, okay? Because you're already providing tremendous support to this partnership. You already, and Megan, thank you so much for wanting to do more, right? But you already assist in our educational outreach by participating in our webinars and other educational opportunities, and distributing our information in your outreach efforts. The fact that the intake staff actually flags for us potential clients is really very helpful and important, and I think is a great indicator of like how much attention the intake team pays to the client details. And if folks want to do more, right? If you want to shadow us or work with us during a specific outreach event or clinic, depending on your schedules and supervisor approvals, there are opportunities, including accompanying Heather to a legal clinic to observe and assist, hanging out with me at a general information session, a conference, or a trafficking event. So just be in touch and let us know.
Again, we've taken up a lot of time, but hope this was informative. I feel like we've gotten a little bit off of us doing personal introductions every time everyone and like a orientation every time new people come on staff. But we are always here to answer questions. Love to chat over lunch or coffee or just in the hallway. Our offices are open. Cheryl's available. I'm available. So thank you so much. I don't know how long I gotta stop my